Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be back. It's been a while since we've done a webinar, so let's hope I can remember how to do it. Already failed by not muting the monitor, so there we go. So today is about editing portraits, so various different tips and tricks that we can do to help your portrait editing, whether that's in the studio or perhaps natural lighting, environment on location, and so on. So that's the plan today. So welcome to you if you're on YouTube or Facebook. If you put a comment either on YouTube or Facebook, that will come straight through to me and we can answer those. If you are in our webinar room and you want to ask a question, the best thing to do is pop that in the Q&A tab and that will come straight through to me as well. If you want to chat, then of course you can do so amongst yourselves, heckling, abuse, whatever, then you can use the chat for that. But putting questions in the Q&A just helps keep it separate. If you want to hide that panel on the right hand side, then you can do so and that will give you a bit more space on screen as well. So let's move over to Capture One. So you should see Capture One here. We've got a bunch of various different things that we can look at. What I will say is that we cover various different things. We do a couple of full edits. We're going to start off with this gentleman here to talk about a few exposure things and editing exposure. We've got one little curious issue in this picture that we're going to fix. We're going to talk about styles with this one and some copy paste stuff and a few other tips that you can do with styles. Great environmental portrait here of Reinhold Messner, Italian explorer, mountaineer, from my friend John McDermott. And we're going to look at the skin tone tool because, to be honest, when you're shooting portraits, you're going to come across variations in skin and so on. You can see a pretty good variation here as an example. It's totally natural. It's on all of us. It's a pain to fix in external editors like Photoshop, but super easy to do in Capture One. So that's also the plan for that. And then if we have time, we can look at a few other little bits as well. So let us start with the first one. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Much prefer you were engaged and interested rather than just listening to me drone on as well. Okay, so this one, I wanted to talk about exposure to some extent. So this is a shot from Ulf Svein. He shot some of our campaign stuff for the last iPad things. So I'm just blocking some spam while I see it. Now looking at this shot, obviously it's a little bit underexposed. Why do I say that? Looking at the histogram. But also it's kind of in moody, darker lighting. We wouldn't necessarily want it super, super bright. And I had some questions that came up the other week about reading the histogram. What should I be paying attention to? There's also another tool which you won't see on this tool tab, but to do with tethered shooting, which is an exposure evaluation. They didn't quite understand that as well. So the histogram's great. We're going to look at that now, but you also have to use your own intuition based on the photo. So if we do a little exercise, so let's just, I'm going to hide this picture so it's just sneaking up there. And then looking at the histogram, we think, well, it's probably a little bit underexposed because we don't have any information from here over to the right-hand side. So nothing really, going on in that respect. So let's just make me a little bit bigger so I'm not cutting my head off. So we could be tempted to boost up the exposure. Yep. So let's do that. Let's just look at the histogram. We'll kind of ignore what's going on with the picture here. So if I was to just look at the histogram and open it up, I would think, okay, something like that is maybe a bit healthy because I've got a nice spread. I'm going to brighten the shadows a bit. Okay, that looks all right. But if we actually look at the picture and we look at where it started from, we could argue maybe it's gone a little bit too far, potentially. But it's not bad, but for me, I think because if we look at the before and after once more, that's where we started, definitely too dark. That's probably going a bit too far in the other way. So I'd like to keep a little bit of the moodiness. So the histogram is not necessarily the be all and end all. We want to use a bit of our own intuition as well. Whoops, a little bit of zoom in here. Max says, histogram is terrible from sensor saturation perspective. ETTR was not used. You know what? I would say don't get too obsessed with exposed to the right. Certainly with a modern camera, there's so much flexibility in a modern camera. I would not stress yourself out too much in the field about always getting exposed to the right. 5 years ago, I might have had a different opinion. Now, not so much, because the sensors are really so clean and super flexible. If you're shooting RAW, of course. If you're not shooting RAW, then you're going to have a problem. So JD says, would I boost exposure or stretch histogram with levels? Well, I do a little bit of combination of everything. So let's reset that. And what I would do is we would actually talk about brightness a little bit as well, because we've got some highlights going on up here. We've got some, let's just whack the exposure up again, not that much. We've got some highlights going on over here. We've got a highlight on this plant pot in the background. We've got some on the edge of his face and so on. So having all that brightness gets a little bit uncomfortable to look at. So we want to kind of balance what's going on really. And exposure will literally brighten everything. So it's going to brighten the shadows, it's going to brighten the midtones, and it's going to brighten the highlights as well. We don't really want this in this photo, I would say. So let's reset once more. I would bring up the brightness a bit. And what the brightness is doing, if I just wiggle it back and forward a bit so you can see it, what the brightness is doing is that it's just opening up the midtones a little bit more, but we're not having quite as dramatic effect on the highlights because I don't really want to brighten those much further. In contrast to the exposure, you can see it's a little bit more dramatic in terms of the highlights. So I would bring up the brightness. I would open up my shadows a small amount as well. And I would probably almost stop there because I think that's a nice compromise for me. I mean, looking into the darkest shadows here, we've still got detail. We're not like blacked out or anything like that. So down here, we're not blacked out or anything. So personal preference, you might want to open it up a little bit more. Let's give it a little tickle of exposure and then pull those highlights down a touch as well. So a combination of the two. So would I stretch this out with the histogram? Well, let's see what happens if we hit auto. Might be a little bit too dramatic. So if I hold my option key down and click on reset, do I like what that's doing? Yeah, it's not bad. I'll probably just pull it back a little bit. Good comment from Dave. There's a lot of dark tones in the image. You want to retain them, so you want the histogram to be more on the left. Absolutely. If you've got a polar bear sitting on an iceberg, everything's going to be more to the right. If you've got a witch's cat in a coal bunker, then of course everything's going to be more to the left. So if you try and make either of those situations the same, it's probably, you know, going to look a little bit strange. Does it seem to lean to the left a little bit? Look at the vase. Yeah, maybe the shelf's wonky. If it's uncomfortable, if we have a look at rotation and flip, but if we make that straight, he's kind of a little bit falling out of the frame there. So I would probably personally, whoops, not do that. Personally leave it where it is. You could straighten up the sofa at the back, but I actually preferred it with a little bit of an angle. And now you've got me thinking. Let's do something like that. What about auto straighten? What does that make of it? See, auto straighten pretty much puts that level along the back, but I think I would prefer it somewhere in between. But good observation, well done. All right. So it's really important to use this slider as well, brightness. It's often glossed over because people don't understand what it does, which is totally understandable because brightness isn't a very descriptive name. You just, when do you hear that? You know, for your TV or something. You don't necessarily find it in other RAW converters as well, but it's a really handy, useful adjustment. What else can we do with this shot? Well, something else you're going to have to do probably for portraits, whether that's environmental, studio or anything, is maybe some minor cleanup because it can be distracting. Quite often I hear, well, I do all my spotting whatever in Photoshop. Fine, but if you haven't tried it in Capture One for the past few years, then you should, because it's changed dramatically from the old spot tool. Don't even know where the old spot tool is. I don't think it's even in my workspace anymore. But if we just add the old spot tool, spot removal, this was a pretty rudimentary tool. So if we go spot, let's just see what happens if I try and get rid of that spot. It's just a bit of a blur kind of thing. It's not necessarily the best job at doing it, and it can't necessarily match the texture. It's just going to blur stuff out. So I would always prefer to use the healing tool itself, which you should find in the layers tool looking like this little sticking plaster. If you're not seeing it here, then you must be running an older version, or you haven't necessarily updated. So let's grab this guy, and that's obviously too big a brush. So I'm going to right click and make that a little bit smaller, and then we're just going to dab over my option there, and then look what it's done. So this is a stripy shirt, so you might feel, okay, that's going to be difficult to heal because of the stripes, but there is actually a fair amount of intelligence going on where Capture One will try and match the texture, and it's found a similar bit of texture to do so. Going to call me a liar now and see if it happens. Same goes for here as well. So totally seamless. It's now picked that up really nicely. So if you're not using it, give yourself a break and do so. Now in this case, how's that looking? Fine, and so on. If I move my cursor out of the viewer, then those little arrows disappear. If you find them annoying, you can right click and turn them off. You can also set a shortcut key for that if you want the best of both worlds. But I find them quite useful because then you always know where the source point is going to be, where Capture One is sampling to make that. So there was a few little spots and blemishes, but otherwise it's a very nice clean photo. Now what about bigger objects? While we're on the subject, let's just dive across to this picture. See anything on the back wall? Surprise! There's a big nasty bronze label or something like that. So the healing brush doesn't have to be just for little tiny things. It can also be for big stuff. And all I did was grab the healing brush to make this a little bit bigger and then wipe over without much care and attention, and away it goes. So it's not just for those little teeny blemishes, you can do bigger stuff as well. Obviously there's always going to be a limit to what those kinds of tools can do, but don't be afraid to use it on bigger things as well. Now going back to our background layer, because of course the healing layer will always sit itself on a separate layer, so we can turn that on and off. We can change the opacity if you want to blend it in a little bit as well. Okay, so going back to the background layer, I just wanted to talk about the highlight recovery. Now it actually isn't too bad if we look at the highlights down here. It might be a little bit too strong, ever so slightly. But what happens if I pull down the highlights even more, then it is having a positive effect, but it's also affecting the background, which I actually quite like a little bit brighter. We've got the white slider as well. This will affect the very brightest end of the histogram. Looking at the histogram, I don't actually expect it to do anything because there's no data at the brightest end. So even if I pull that right down, there's a little tiny wiggle. Actually, maybe it's enough. Possibly. So even if we pull that right down, there's a small change, but it's still making this brighter spot a little bit darker. So roll in the style brushes, because style brushes are really handy on portraits for dodging and burning, controlling highlights, opening up shadows if you don't have the best lighting, or if you didn't have portable lighting to bring with you, or it was candid and you just want to balance up those lights a little bit. So what I can do with our style brushes down here on the left hand side, these are all built-in brushes which have preset adjustments to them. So I'm going to grab where are you highlights recover. So you see there's a little tick next to it. That sets up my brush immediately, picks the brush for me. I can right click and change my parameters. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I don't go too over the background. And let's make this a bit smaller, and then I'm just going to bring in some highlight recovery in the background here. Now it will happen quite slowly because the flow is super low. So that means as I brush, it's going to build up the adjustment. So we could also take some down here as well. There might not be much in the raw file to give. It's a D850, which, you know, is an older camera. So we can pull a few bits down here as well. Now it might not look like much is happening, but let's turn on highlights recover and then turn that back on. It's just taking that down a little bit, which is enough for me, like so. And then it means that we've got the benefit that we've kept the brighter areas in the background that I want as well. If you feel this area is too dark, grab another style brush. So we can grab our Dodge style brush. Going to make this a little bit bigger. Nice low flow, so it's going to build up the adjustment slowly, and then we can do a few passes of the brush and open up this area a bit as well, maybe just on the foreground and under there as well. So if we turn this off, you can see before and after. So just, you know, a little lift which might help us, especially as he's falling into shadow. Okay, there was a question earlier that James said, I think the outer focus hand holding the back of the paper needs to be darker so it doesn't stand out. Oh, I just brightened it. But you could, James, you know, that's actually a really good use case for style brushes. You could grab the burn one, this one over here, and then burn that detail back in again. So yeah, absolutely, you could do that as well. I'd just be conscious of making the shadows a bit too dark on the backs, on the shadows down here, because if we block this up too much, it's something I find I'm overly sensitive to seeing crushed blacks and too bright whites. I'm not a fan of it. If this plant pot is bothering you, easy fix. I just thought we could crop it out, maybe just crop the edge of it out. Is that a better crop? Actually, don't think so. Prefer it so that we've got leading out of the picture a little bit, like so. Cool, let's take a couple of other questions. Let's look over here. Good question from Sherko. How to know when to stop editing the skin color and tones before you go overboard? Let's park that question and look at that when we come to skin tone editing. We can have a look. Because true, you can make everything super uniform if you wanted to. It just doesn't look very natural. Whoops, sorry, my light's just died its battery, which is annoying because it said it had 2 hours battery left in it. So sorry, I'm going to be a little bit dingy now, unless it was power saving. Let's see if it stays on again. How to copy and apply a skin tone across several. Yep, we'll have a look at that as well. Will capture and implement workspace rotation like in Photoshop? It's useful for masking. That's a really good question, Paulina. I can't tell you if yes we would. Yeah, light battery is dying, sorry. I can't tell you if yes we could, but it's a good suggestion. Let's do a little swapsy. Luckily, there's one of these guys sitting in the background, except the mount, the quick release mount is not on the wrong one. So you have to cope with me sitting in the dark, sorry. Sorry about that. Let's boost up the exposure a bit so it's not quite so pathetic. That's frustrating. I checked it and it said like 200 minutes of runtime left, so, but there we go. All right. Let's move on. I think that's a good starter for talking about exposure. Now this one, we're not going to do a full edit on this, but there was an interesting, if I zoom in. So this is shot fully open, I think, for this lens f2.8. It's a 70 to 28-70 lens, and then you see we've got a little bit of chromatic aberration or fringing around here like so, because it's shot wide open, quite a harsh sunlight coming across. So unfortunately the lens hasn't coped too well and it's just got a little bit of aberration. So if you see this, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, there is a purple fringing slider which might help you. So if we defringe, that takes it down a little bit, but if it's quite severe like this one, we can fix it with the color editor. So what I'm going to do is a really sloppy mask. So if we grab our brush, let's just make this a respectable size, and we're not going to do anything particularly neatly. I'm just going to roughly mask over this spot like so. M on your keyboard to hide and show the mask. I hope you know that and are embracing Mask and Capture One. We're going to grab our advanced color editor, and I'm going to very carefully just pick that color like so, just to make sure we've got the whole range, and we're going to expand that out too. Now I'm not worried about making this a really big range because we've only going to affect where we've masked, and we're not close to his skin tone or anything like that, so it's not going to matter too much. And then we're just going to pull down our saturation like so. So now we've just killed that. Now, would you see that on a print or if it was published? Debatable, but you never, it's just ever so slightly distracting. So if we can get rid of that, so much the better. And if you find any other or a similar issue elsewhere, like there's a little bit along the side of the glasses here, we can just brush it out. So if you get anything nasty like that, I just thought that was quite an interesting example to fix. And also, if you're working with someone with glasses, don't forget you can always mask inside the glasses. If it's a little bit hazy, you can bump up the contrast. You can do a bunch of other things. So just consider that you can also mask glass lenses as well. Okay, so handy little tip there. So let's go and look at Handsome Rasmus over here. Now, you could argue with me, this is not really a portrait, but it was a good discussion on using styles, and there was also a little copy, paste and speed edit that we can do as well. So certainly if you're shooting a bunch of portraits and you have to deliver 2 or 3 from a slightly different angle and those kinds of things as well, then copy paste and a tweak with speed edit you might find quite nice. All right, let's see. Tim, I agree. I wish there was a hotkey I could use to toggle between auto mask on and off instead of mask off on. I agree, it would be nice. And if you don't know what Tim's talking about, it's because in our brush options up here, you can set a mask on and off, but you can also say only display mask when drawing, but you can't set a hotkey, which is really annoying. So I shall bring that up again, Tim, because it makes sense. Antoine, I'll come back to your question when we get to it again. Dodge and highlight brighten. So dodge, well, you can see actually. I'll answer it now. I'm just going to prove myself a liar. So if we go to dodge and do a squiggle, dodge brighten. So let's just brighten up his jacket. And then what was the other one you were asking, Antoine? That was, what's the difference between highlight, brighten? Okay, so if we go highlight, it's more targeted really. So if we go highlight, brighten, and then we just brush in some here. So we can actually see, oh, it helps if I pick the right one, highlights, brighten, there we go. Highlights, brighten, because we can actually see what's happening in each layer. So if we go to dodge, brighten, I think it's on a curve, so you can see this curve is boosted up. The exposure's got a little nudge as well. If we look at highlights, brighten, we can see it's a highlight adjustment and the white's being pulled down, so it has some control and there's nothing going on with the curve. So this one is very much targeted to highlights. Dodge is going to brighten everything to some extent, but you can see as it's a curve, it's going to have a little bit less effect down here, a little bit less effect up there, but there is an overall exposure bump as well. So 2 different kind of adjustments. So if you want to just boost your highlights, use that, because then if you're working in an area where you're kind of nudging into other tonal ranges, then that will avoid you affecting those tonal ranges. Okay, so let's go to Rasmus. I shot this in Ireland a month or so ago now. Time flies, geez. Along with a few other wedding pics as part of a workshop. I'm not a wedding photographer, don't want to be a wedding photographer. Huge respect for those people. It would stress me out no end. So let's look at styles and a couple of tips if you're using styles for your portrait editing that I think are pretty valuable. So I'm going to use a Beyond Film style, which is available from us. So 3 different strengths you can see. So light, medium, strong. Strong's probably a bit too punchy, I would say. But I'm going to settle on this one here, F200. Now you can, when you're applying styles, just tap and that's applied the style to the picture. But if you want a little bit more flexibility, I would clear that. And don't forget, you can right click and say, put this style on a layer. What's the benefit of that? A couple of things. One, you can vary the opacity. Two, you can punch holes in the mask, because this will make a mask that covers the entire picture and the style. I'll show you in a second. But if we wanted to, let's say the style wasn't working too nice on parts of the background, or the sky maybe in this case, then we could actually punch a hole out of that style, so you're only applying it where it makes sense. So let's apply this to a new layer. And now we've got F202 on a new layer, so we can turn that style off, see what it's doing. It actually looks pretty nice, almost straight out the bat. We can roll our opacity down if it's too strong. It is maybe a little bit contrasty, but we've got that style look isolated onto a singular layer. So what I can do now is make a new field adjustment layer, and I'm just going to call this edits, because I'm going to isolate some other edits onto a layer as well. Now you don't have to do this, but if you're a super control freak and you want to have, you know, all your adjustments split up into different layers and be able to have careful control over each one in terms of opacity and other tweaks you might want to do, this is a nice way of doing it. Okay, let's just throw in a crop for this as well. I feel he's a little bit too far in the distance. So that's not a bad edit straight out of the bat, but this wouldn't be much of a live stream if we didn't go into a bit more detail. So the only thing I would say is that for me, it's getting a little bit too dark on the trousers here, almost slightly uncomfortably so. So a little tweak for that. So we're on our edits layer. If I press M on my keyboard, that's a filled layer. So anything I do is going to affect the entire photo. So if we zoom in a bit, a little improvement is if I take the blacks. So if we pull open the blacks, then you can see that's pretty much targeted on the darkest areas of the picture. Now if I open up the shadows, let's see what happens in contrast. You can see if I just wave this back and forth, we're actually affecting the nice nuclear looking landscape behind us. So using the blacks, we've pretty much got a nice targeted adjustment without really having to work that hard, just on the suit. So I would open that up a little tiny touch as well. So don't forget that, you know, in the same way you've got whites, which are very critical to the far end of the histogram, you'll see if I pull this back, it's really just giving us some more detail back in the sky. If we pull the highlights back, it's probably going to be a little bit more dramatic. So that gives us just enough to open up those shadows as well. What else would I do with this? Not a great deal. I was thinking earlier, I mean, it was a little bit dingy. Again, we've got a mark there. So if we grab our healing brush, little tip, if you want a fast way, especially when you're healing, to change the size of your brush, like so, then obviously you can right click and drag the sliders. But is the overhead camera on? Yes, it is. That's always nice. So if you hold down Control Option for the Mac people, we come to PC in a minute, drag left or right with your mouse, like so, then it's going to change the size of the brush, which is a fast way of doing it, left and right. You can't see my pen, it's just over here. If we drag up and down, that changes the hardness. So you can very quickly mess around with the size of your brush without having to go into that right click menu. So let's just get rid of that. So that gets rid of that. There's a little one here as well. You know, you don't have to be super critical, but anything like that can be annoying and distracting, and it only takes, you know, a second to fix as well. One other thing I thought with this shot, and again, I shot this on a A7R4, of course, just as I get an A7R, a new one comes out. And it was a little bit dingy, and obviously this is 60 megapixel. It's slightly noisy in the suit, you know, down here it's a bit more obvious. Would I be super bothered about that? Maybe not, because I think by the time you've outputted it, printed it, sent it to web or whatever, you know, you're compressing 60 megapixels down into something 2000 megapixels across or less, if it was Instagram, are you going to see it? But let's say we were a bit worried about the noise and we just wanted to soften that off a little bit. Then we could do so quite nicely. So if we make a new field adjustment layer once more, so that's over the whole shot. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on, where is it, display grayscale mask. And what this does is represent our mask in grayscale terms. So white means that it's fully masked, black means there is no mask. So we're hiding the picture as a distraction. And this way we can see what the mask is doing without the picture getting in the way. What I want to do is turn on Luma range. And what we're going to do is we're going to change our mask based on luminosity values. So I just want to have those darkest areas. Now this part wasn't too bad, it was more his trousers which were a little bit dodge. So let's go for that. Now it's also included some of this background areas, but I'm not fussed really. So the mask like so, because if this area had a bit more noise reduction, it's out of focus. The fact that it might get a bit softer, I don't really care about. So I'm not going to go and carefully try and just mask out this area. We're just trying to avoid putting more noise reduction on maybe some of the more detailed parts like his hair and his facial features and so on. But if we zoom in a bit and then we go to our noise, wrong tool tab, noise reduction, and we bump up the luminance, then we can just soften those areas up a bit. It might be hard to see on our webinar live stream broadcast. So this is something you can try for yourself as well. So just have a go at Luma masking of those darker areas, especially if you need to bump up noise reduction in darker zones a little bit. If we turn that layer off, you can see before and after. Oh, now my rear light's gone out as well. God, I'm not trusting the battery level indication on these again. Remember to charge your lights, people. So sorry, I'm sitting more so in the dark now. Yeah, so you can see just the difference that has, hopefully, on the broadcast when I turn that noise reduction on and off. I probably wouldn't do it that much. I'd back it off a bit. But you get the idea that we can isolate a bit of noise reduction just in those certain zones. Sorry, David. Yes. How do you do that brush sizing with Windows? So, oh, I forgot to turn it off after all that. So, as I said, for the Mac, Control Option. Let's bring up the brush, like so. Control Option, and then up and down. If you're on a PC, what you need to do is do a right click and Control Out. Has to be a right click as well. Okay, sorry I missed that, David. Whilst we pause for us answering a couple of questions, let's go for a few others. Barbecue UK sounds like a good name. Can we show how to darken the background and allow the subject to stand out more? Yeah, sure, we can do that. Is there any plans to add AI-based tools like easy eye whitening, beach volleyball, barbecue? It's all happening today. You can easily do that with the style brush. Let's look at that. Remind me if I forget, but let's look at that with another picture. But style brushes, you know, you can really quickly pick those up and go through, and you are in then control of deciding how much you want to adjust. David, your photos are too perfect. You need more problem photos to show off what Capture One can fix. I'm not promoting shooting poorly or lazily. Let's see if we can find some bad ones. But hopefully, you know, any of these techniques you can apply to your own stuff. Bad photo or good photo. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say this was perfect. It was a lucky shot out of camera, but we can still go on to improve it in Capture One for sure. Can you do grayscale mask in conjunction with the color editor? Grayscale mask works with any mask. Remember, it's a different way of representing the mask. That's all it is. It's hiding the picture. So whatever mask you've got, however you've made it, you can use to represent that mask as a grayscale. William says, I'd love to see how much can be done with portrait retouching. Middle-aged executives who need wrinkle softening, etc. Let's have a look actually at another picture. It's not something, I'll be totally honest with you, it's not something I'm a massive expert at. Michael Wolowosnovich, who's got a good YouTube channel and has guested on us, not for a while now, but a few years back. Michael actually did a really good example of some dodging and burning with like more traditional tools. But I'd say if you want to fully soften, then you might be looking into retouching tools. But let's actually have a look at selective sharpening, because sometimes the issue is you don't want to sharpen the whole picture. You want to target that where it makes sense and what makes sense for your subject as well. Let's see. Can I change the default to an unconstrained crop? Yeah, Alan was talking about. So this is what I have. So if I right click, I have my default is unconstrained. If we look in Capture One's preferences, where is it? Under crop, you can use an aspect ratio per variant, which some people prefer, or you can use an aspect ratio global. So I use the global one because I tend to freehand crop all the time. A lot of people prefer to have the aspect ratio locked to each picture because that's more efficient for them. So whatever you prefer, you can change that in the crop tool. Okay, to finish this one before we run out of time, let's copy paste this across. So how do we do that in Capture One? Copy and apply up the top here. So I've moved the Capture One interface. So let's say copy, and let's just apply these across like so. So those adjustments are going to head over to those three pictures, and it's also done all the layers as well. So we might find that a lot of those layers don't work, like the luminance based one actually should work, to be honest, because that will be, if we do Option M, so you can see that luma based layer, the luminosity is not based on the source, it's based on the target. So if we go through each picture, let's turn the grayscale mask on. Option M to see that. So it's not like the mask is the same for each picture, it's based on the luminosity values. So it does actually work in a copy paste aspect as well. So last one, Option M, whoops, that was Command M. Let's try that again. There we go, Option M for the mask. Then you can see that works really nicely between those three. Okay, let's turn the grayscale mask off. And the only thing I would say, if we look at this one and then compare to these, like so, these are just a little bit on the cool side. So how do we quickly change the white balance on these? Speed edit, which is a really great tool if you haven't tried it, just to quickly change a value on a bunch of pictures or a single picture without having to use the interface, like the sliders when I say that, without having to get into a copy paste as well. And also you might not necessarily want to copy paste, because copy paste always copies the same value from one picture to another. What speed edit does is go up or down of the value from the starting point of each picture. So if all of these shots have a slightly different Kelvin value, which I don't think they do unless the camera was an auto. Oh, they do actually. See, look, 5334 and so on. So the camera's done an auto white balance on each of these, but I'd like to make all of them a bit warmer by the same amount. Now, if I did a copy paste, I would have the same value, which I might not want. If we look in Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, you'll see Speed Edit Keys, and you'll see my white balance is set to number 1 on the keyboard. So take a look at this. It's pretty cool if you haven't tried it. If I press and hold 1 on my keyboard, now you can see the Kelvin value under each picture, like so. Now all I need to do is click drag on the picture, pretend this is a massive invisible slider on the photo, and then I can make everything warmer. I'm going to go dramatic, except I'm on the adjustment layer. Hang on, let me undo that. Helps if I'm on the background. Actually, speed edit will divert to the background anyway. Sorry, what am I talking about? So if I drag to the right, you see that's going to boost or reduce the white balance by the same value on each picture, but not apply the same value. So it's additive or negative, but you see each one has a slightly different value. Now I probably wouldn't go that warm, but just to bump it up a little bit like so. Now speed edit works for everything. So if I quickly decided, you know what, the highlights are a bit too bright on this one. So again, if you want to check what your speed edit keys are, you can see highlight is A on the keyboard. It's obviously a sensible layout, ASDF, QWERTY and so on. So if I hold down A, you can see the highlights. I could drag and bring those highlights down on 3 pictures simultaneously. So if you've got a bunch of pictures like this and you just want to do some quick tweaks, then speed edit is a really good way to do it. Now let's say for whatever reason one of these pictures, the exposure was a little bit different and I just wanted to do a quick tweak and balance it up with the others. Right now this button is turned on, edit selected. If you can't see that in your Capture One interface, if you have a look under image, then you've also got a toggle here. But if I turn that off now and now do speed edit, let's hold down Q. That's going to do exposure. You see it's only happening on the middle guy, like so. Let's go to my background. So it's only happening on the middle guy, like so. There we go. If I turn edit all selected on and hold down Q, then it's happening on all 3 of them. So this toggle, if you don't have it, you can right click and say customize toolbar, or it's the same toggle up here as well. So a group of portraits like that, let's hide that now. Speed edit gives you a really nice way to add a combination of shots. All right, let's move on and talk about skin tone with Reinhold Messner, Italian explorer mountaineer, shot by my friend John McDermott in Italy. So thanks, John, for giving me this. Nice, powerful portrait. We can see John's edit here. He's gone for a black and white. I saw a question about that earlier, and yes, we will have a look at a black and white as well. So here's the unedited version straight out of camera. Pretty nice. Great job on exposure and everything else. Not much to do. Again, looking at our histogram, it's pretty good. There's a lot of dark tones in the shirt and so on. So am I expecting the histogram to look like this? Not really. Kind of takes the mood out of it, I would say. So if I was going to do anything in terms of brightening it up, I might add a touch of brightness. I would see what auto levels did if I liked it. I do. Pull that back a bit just to make sure the skin doesn't get too bright. And in terms of brightness, exposure, that looks pretty good. And now the histogram is kind of nice as well. So I might open up the shadows a tiny touch. Just because you've got tons of dynamic range in the camera doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use it. Realism is important, I feel. So let's zoom in and pour Reinhold. So I'm not going to go too close. So typical, and I hate to say the word issue or problem because it's not an issue or a problem. We all have variations in skin tones. Sometimes though it's nice to correct it in photography. Now if my light hadn't gone out, you know, you can see variation in skin tones here as an example. Sometimes mine is relatively even, but certainly if someone's cold in the studio, if you're shooting in the studio, you'll see a variation in skin tone from hands, legs, arms, and so on. And using the skin tone tool is a really simple way to even out skin tones, but also have a bit of a natural look as well. So let's do this on Reinhold, and we'll do it in, you know, the wrong way and the right way, I guess. First of all, the wrong way so you can see exactly what's happening, and then we do it the right way so you can give a lot more control. All right, so let's go and find our color editor, and we're moving to our skin tone tab. It looks much the same as the advanced tab. If I flick between the two, with the addition, the skin tone tab has some uniformity, and these sliders, hue, saturation, and lightness, they form a similar function or perform a similar function to advanced, but their scale is much smaller. So they offer super fine control, if you like. So the range of the slider doesn't do as much as in the advanced one. So if we go to this picker here, because nothing is defined, what you're looking to do is to go onto your subject and think, okay, where is the desirable skin tone, which is the skin tone that looks good on my subject. And what I'm trying to do is just to take out some of the redness around the nose here. Babies' noses too often look really yellow in pictures for some reason, so you can also use it for that. It's not just us older people. So which skin tone do I like on Reinhold? I'm going to go around here, I would say. If I was just to click on the nose for a second, you would see, okay, it's not quite the same. So my desirable skin tone is somewhere around here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is expand out this range. Why? Because what I'm looking to do is to go fishing, if you like, cast my net out and catch all the undesirable skin tones, which is in this triangle, and transform it to this picked spot in the middle. And we do that by dragging the hue slider to the right. So watch what happens if we go all the way to the right. All his skin tone now is essentially the same. Is that good? Yes and no. We come to that. Saturation, that will make sure the saturation of the picked skin tone, everything is then compressed to our target, and the same with lightness. If we pull this up, you're going to see it makes it much flatter. So we need some care there. So that's great. If we option click this, you'll see before and after. So you can see very clearly what the skin tone tool is doing. But is it a good result, like end result? No, because what other issues have we got? Well, if we zoom out a touch, let's zoom out a touch and option click this once more. You can see it's got, you know, desired effect on his face, but it's also changing his hair tone a little bit. We don't want that. It's changing the color of his lips. It's a bit too much. So yes, okay, I can see, all right, this is working nice, but it's having some desirable effects. So let's not do it like that. But now hopefully you understand how the tool works. But what we're going to do this time is we're going to stick it, of course, on a layer. So we're going to make a new field adjustment layer, which looks like this, and we're going to do the same thing. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense because a field adjustment layer is the same as doing the background. Yes and no. But this is going to help us make sure the tool is set up correctly before we decide where to brush it in. So you'll be able to do this very quickly once you've done this a few times. This seems longer because we're explaining it step by step. So we're going to grab our picker, we're going to pick our desirable skin tone, we're going to widen our net to catch our bad skin tone, and we're going to move our hue slider to the right. You can back it off a little bit if it's unnatural, and then lightness I'll be a bit careful about. So now that's of course affecting the entire picture. Name your layers, let's call this skin, and we're going to right click and we're going to say clear mask. And that's going to get rid of the mask, but we still have our skin tone fix, which we can then brush back in where we like. So let's say clear mask, comes back, grab our brush, go onto our picture, make this a bit smaller and keep our flow relatively low, nice and low. So that means we can vary the amount of skin tone fix depending on how big the problem, again, it's not a problem, how big the problem area is that we want to fix. So somewhere here we can brush over this. The more we brush, the greater the adjustment will be. Around the eyes, a little bit over here, tiny bit up the top. There we go. And yeah, slight bit there, and then we can stop. So if we look at our mask, it's going to be a lot more, you know, loose and not as accurate as it was before. But if we turn skin off and back on, you can see the change. We can bring our opacity down to 0, which will mean no effect, or we can go somewhere in between. So between the ability to vary the sliders here, the opacity and the flow on your brush, you have an enormous amount of control as opposed to just slapping it on the whole picture. So this will give you a much better, more natural end result. We can also do actually a quick heal. There's a couple of little spots here we could get rid of. If you're not happy where Capture One has done the pick, that doesn't look good to me. I would actually go over here because this area is in focus, this area isn't. So sometimes we just need to be a little bit careful. Same for this one. I would actually align this to the line of his nose as well, and job done, like so. So the skin tone tool, it's a massive aid in any portrait where you just want to do a quicker alignment of skin tones. What shortcut is used to toggle the mask? M. Oh, there you go, you corrected yourself. M for mask. You can change it, of course, like all shortcuts in Capture One. So there's our mask. If we do Option M for grayscale, that's how our grayscale mask looks. And you can see now, because our flow was set to be nice and low, if you remember, flow of 4. So here, our adjustments are going to have a greater effect than they do over here. So this will give you, an enormous amount of variation from full correction down to, a much, much smaller correction. So really that's the beauty of using a brush in this way. Now you might find that there could be an even quicker way. Let's turn this skin tone off. There's also an adjustment brush, which might also work, style brush, sorry. So if we find our reduce, where is it? Red skin reduction style brush. Sets up a few things in the color editor. And then let's try it as well. So this is just taking red out of the image. So there we go. That's done that. So if we turn that on and off, you can see before and after, or do you prefer the skin tone aligned to his skin tone? So the difference between these two is that the style brush pulls some red out of the shot. If we look on the color editor, you can see what it's doing. So it's desaturating some red. Whereas the skin tone tool is aligning it to a color present on the skin. So the skin tone tool is the most accurate way you can do it. By using the style brush, you might find it just does the job nice and fast. So you can try the style brush. If it's not doing it for you, then you can try the skin tone tool. Now you can have more than one layer for skin tone correction. So if you imagine this was a group shot and you had me standing next to Reinhold Messner, which would be nice. I'm going to need my own correction. He's going to need his own correction. So we would just do that on 2 different layers. Equally, if you've got, as I said, a model in the studio, if he or she is cold, their skin tone can vary between arms, legs and face. That's also a way to align it as well. Or tan lines on a body. All kinds of reasons where this works really nicely. What does the smoothness sliders do? I would be very surprised if you would need to touch it in this case. So what smoothness does is this. So this fuzzy area. So the hard lines is the color range. The fuzzy area is how it rolls off into neighboring colors. So if we ramp smoothness down to 1, you can see it has a hard fall off. So what you might end up seeing is some posterization where we're going from a color that is in range to then out of range. So it stops like an abrupt shift when our color is, on the cusp. So I would be surprised if you ever have to touch this. It's the same in the advanced color editor. Let's just pick his scarf over here. So you can see the blue roll off here as an example. So it can be useful if we turn on view selected color range. If you're trying to get a really specific color isolated, then it can be helpful to then do so. But it can often give you a bit of a nasty fall off as well. So you just have to be mindful of that. Whoops, let's not get rid of my skin tone edit. Let's delete that one. And then finally, do I want to do anything else with this shot? So let's go back to, what did we do on the background? Hang on, I've lost the pen on my button on my Wacom. I would add in a bit more contrast, I would think, and maybe a touch of clarity and structure because we've got loads of nice sharpness around here. Now, if we want to do black and white, probably not that much clarity. If we want to do black and white, it's not a bad idea to start from where we've left off with our color. So we can say clone variant. So this will make us a virtual copy. So look over here. So we've got these virtual copies already. So if we say clone variant, we're going to get number 4, which is going to be an identical copy, but we're not duplicating the raw file. Then I can decide to go ahead and convert this to black and white, which I shall do so from the black and white tool. I'm going to do a proper black and white in a second, I think. How are we doing for time? Eek. Running out. So I'm going to do a black and white in a second, and then we'll finish off with some selective sharpening. So let's do that on this shot. This one we won't have time to get to, but if I show you similar thing with skin tone, this is Brandy, my friend Brandy. So I've just pinched one of your pictures, Brandy. We've got, always name your layers, a similar thing with the skin tone tool here. So if we look at the mask, on our grayscale mask, you can see it's kind of spread over this area. Not very accurate, doesn't have to be, because it's fairly targeted. And if we turn off this skin tone layer, if we turn this off, you can see before and after. There's also a bit of color grading on here, so let's turn that off. And you can see before and after. So again, we've got, you know, just typical things, slight difference in skin tone based on sun and so on. So it's a little bit paler here. We've got a deeper skin tone here. So if we turn this on, then that levels that out quite nicely. And of course, you can decide how, you know, much of that correction you want to have with your opacity. So full correction to no correction. So again, putting it on layers gives you that advantage. Dave, yes Dave, I agree. I always use the skin tone to more control and better to match tone rather than remove color. It looks more natural. Yeah, exactly. I think the style brush can be a good quick fix. Like it wouldn't work on the baby nose syndrome, which can go yellow. But if you want the ultimate accuracy, then the skin tone tool is the way to do it. Just going to check over here. I think we're good for questions. Yeah, that's pretty good. Good comment from John, actually. Speed edit is brilliant for large batches of corporate headshots. Yeah, exactly. If you've got, you know, a bunch of corporate headshots, same lighting, same conditions, you know, let's say something like this. There we go. Same lighting, same conditions, and you want to give everything, you know, that quick adjustment. Like we could say, oh, okay, maybe everything's a little bit too much on the bright side. Hold down Q on my keyboard. Let's drop exposure on everything so they all look nice. And remember, you can toggle this on and off. So if you want to align shots or align a story, this is a really useful way to do it. And it's hard to do that, you know, with sliders and copy paste, or at least it's slower. Speed edit is just super speedy, hence the name. Okay, let's finish off. Let's go and do this last one. If I can find my editing portraits, there it is. Okay, this gentleman, which is Antonio Alfare, which is a great name. So let's just reset this one. This is how it started. And we move through this relatively quickly as I'm conscious you have other things to do today. So first of all, I'm going to crop like so. So let's crop in a little bit tighter. This one we wanted to go black and white. So would I do any editing first? If it was like super underexposed or had a massive blown out highlight, I might fix that first. But, you know, look at John's histogram, also shot by my friend John. You know, it's bang on really, exposure's pretty good. So there's nothing really to fix in that respect. So I would go straight ahead and turn on my enable black and white. Then we have some density sliders of the different color channels. You'll probably find red is going to have a profound effect on the skin tone. So I would brighten that up quite a bit, make him a bit brighter. Blue is probably going to affect his work clothes, as you can see. I'll pull that down a bit, but the other sliders probably, just based on their colors, aren't going to have a massive, oh, yellow has a little bit. Let's bump that up as well. So we've got our basic black and white conversion. Now, when I come to play with contrast, I tend to quite like using curves, and I tend to quite like using the Luma curve. The reason I like using the Luma curve is it has no effect on color. So if I've carefully tuned, some of the color densities based on those sliders, if you use an RGB curve, you're going to be moving the saturation around a little bit as well. A Luma curve is purely based on contrast. I might be a complete fallacy, I've told myself, but I seem to prefer the result using Luma when we're playing with black and white. So I would add a bit more contrast and brighten up like so. So if we option click on this one, we can see before and after. So just a bit punchier. Let's just pop that away over there. And what I wanted to talk about for this one is sharpening, because we might not necessarily want to sharpen our entire subject. Especially, there was a question earlier about retouching, like removing wrinkles and so on. On a subject like this, and Reinhold, doesn't matter if you're enhancing the character, but if it's, someone like Brandy, hi Brandy, she might not appreciate me putting 50 structure on her face or something like that. Even though Brandy looks pretty amazing, it doesn't make sense sharpening skin when you don't need to. So going back to this gentleman. So how would we selectively place our sharpening? Because really I don't need to sharpen his fleece or down here or anything. You could almost say it would be a bit distracting. So what I would do on my background layer is just kill all the sharpening. So just put that down to 0. And we could also do a little bit of negative clarity as well. That would just take the edge off some sharpness as well. So that will soften everything up a bit. If we want to put some sharpening back in, then we can do so, you've guessed it, with a brush. So let's start with a field adjustment layer, and we call this sharpening or sharp things, whatever we want to call it. Look at this man's features and decide, okay, what works? So I could add in the default sharpening amount back in. Every camera in Capture One has a default sharpening amount. So let's put a bit of that in. This slider here, Halo Sup, this is halo suppression. So what this does, if we go in super close and we do a crazy amount of sharpening, you'll get this slight halo you can see between the brighter and darker areas. So if we turn on halo suppression, it will reduce that somewhat. So if I slide this back and forward, then you can see the change in the pixels at that level. So if you do want to sharpen by a high amount, then you can bring up halo suppression as well. And then we could also add a bit of structure, which is like a micro level clarity, and we could also add a touch of clarity as well. So if we turn this layer off and back on, you can see what it's doing. Now you could argue that's a bit strong. Don't forget, you've got your opacity sliders, so let's worry about that. But if we look at what it's doing to, his sweater and his shirt, do we really need that to be that sharp? Not really. So once again, like we did with our skin tone tool, we can clear this mask, and then we can grab our brush. We can set that nice and low with our flow, and then we've got ourselves a sharpening brush, and then we can just brush in as we wish onto those features and face. I might do his hat, just the edge of the hat, and we're done. If we wanted to sharpen anything else up, let's say if he was holding a tool of the trade or something like that, and it made sense to sharpen that up, we could do so as well. But if we zoom in and look at, not 200%, it's too much, and turn that off and on, then you can see the difference. And if we really want to add more sharpening in this part, then we would just brush more. If we look at our grayscale, so you see we haven't reached maximum sharpness on the peak of the cap, and we're close to approaching maximum sharpness around these areas. So that grayscale mask is a good indication of how far your mask has gone. And if we want to ramp that back, then of course we can dial our opacity back and forth as we see fit. Again, with our healing brush, I would just go down, and again, doesn't have to be spots. We can do something bigger like that. If we've gone too far, like I have, E to switch to your eraser, and then we can just erase a bit of the mask out. But very simple to just go on dust bust. You can let Capture One take the wheel most of the time. If you need to do a manual fix, then you can just pull that source point around. There we go. Cool. Well, people, we nearly got through it all. It was just Brandy we missed out. Sorry, Brandy. But we had a brief look. That was just a wide exploration into a skin tone fix, but it can be something as simple as the nose or across arms, legs, face, and so on together. All right, last few questions, and we shall let you go on your way. What is the source point out of the crop area? Alan, are you just asking me that to poke fun of a deficiency? So what Alan's talking about is if you've cropped and let's say you're fixing something up here with the source brush, then it can pick a source point outside the cropped area. And there's really only one way around that, Alan, is to either leave cropping to the end if you know you're going to have to find, or if you think source points are likely to be outside of the cropped area, or you can right click and reset your crop, fix it and then crop again. But if you think that's going to be an issue, I would just leave your cropping to the end. I mean, it's all non-destructive, so it doesn't really matter when you do it. But yes, it's a slight annoyance, which I agree would be nice if it wasn't there. And thanks, Diego. If you're wondering who's answering in the background, that's Diego. Thanks, Diego, for picking up the slack on my lack of being able to answer every single question. Capture One 23, when can I upgrade? You can upgrade now, actually. If you want to log into your account, you'll get the ability to upgrade straight away. If you're not on Capture One 22 yet, let's say you're on 21, shock horror, you could upgrade to 22, and that also includes 23. So that's a really good deal to do at the moment. Wow, the big question, when will Capture One work with Ventura 13? It's not far out, actually. If you're desperate to update to Ventura, don't just yet. Some people say it's working fine, but working fine is different to supported, just to be clear, because everyone uses different combinations of tools and features. Some stuff might be fine, some stuff might not be. So just wait until we officially say, yes, guys and girls, you can go ahead and use Ventura. Otherwise, sorry if I didn't get to your specific question. There was a good one from James, actually, which we can very quickly show you. Even if you're on a black and white photo, the color balance tool still works. So if you wanted to triple tone, so if we wanted to mess around with the color toning, then the color balance tool works. That actually looks really nice, quite like that. Then you can mess around with the color balance tool and pump in any color that you want to the shadows, midtones and highlights. Actually a really nice way to work. So yes, the color balance tool will work on a black and white and very nicely too. Will the basic install of 22 work on Ventura? I have no idea, actually. I haven't tried it myself. I haven't upgraded to Ventura. I have a lot of stuff that I have to rely on to do on my daily job, if you like. And Ventura was only out a couple of days ago. So I personally never risk it within the first 4 to 6 weeks. I let everyone else iron out all the bugs and stuff that's happened, and then like a chicken I follow after that. So unless you're desperate, I would just hold force and wait, to be honest. Tim, no, 23 is not out, but if you want to upgrade now, let's say if you're on 21, you can do so. If it was out, Tim, this would be a very different live stream, I would tell you. For those of you who are on YouTube, if you don't want to miss out again, please subscribe. Oh, sorry, Tim, you're over my button. I'm going to press that again. If you do want to subscribe, and I hope you do, then it simply means that when we come to do future live streams, then you'll know exactly when we're going to be live. And talking about 23, you'll of course know when we will do a nice live stream about that talking about all the new features as well. So please go ahead and subscribe. Also looks really good for my stats as well if the subscriber numbers go up. So thanks again. I hope to see you all again soon. Keep an eye out on social media and our newsletters for when the next live streams are coming up. I'll be back early November, I would think. So sorry there's been a bit of a lack of live streams lately, but we've got some nice things happening in November, December, and some guests coming up as well. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Sorry I'm sitting in the dark. I remember to charge the lights fully next time, and hope to see you all again soon. Take care. See you soon. Bye now.